Okay, so thank you for joining us. I'm Karen Mayada Allman. I'm one of the author event coordinators at Elliott Bay Book Company. And we, as you can tell, are strictly virtual now for our author events, but we're really glad to still be able to do them. And it's allowed people to join us from all over the country and also from other countries, as we have people from all over tonight. And so that's been one of the silver linings for us. And the other day, even though this event is not in person, I got to meet Pam Mandel. And so that was wonderful when she came by to sign books. So Pam Mandel first read at Elliott Bay in 2017 with Sarah Batham and Anna Bodica, who I believe is here tonight. They were part of a group reading for that year's volume of Best American Travel Writing. A Hedgebrook alum, she is a longtime freelance writer and writing teacher, as well as blogger at nerd'seyeview.com. And she's particularly well known for her writing about travel, though she's also written more recently about politics as well. Her work has been published in Seattle Met, Lonely Planet, the San Francisco Chronicle, and JewishinSeattle.com and elsewhere. And this week, on Election Day, she celebrated the publication of her book, The Same River Twice, a memoir of dirtbag backpackers, bomb shelters, and bad travel. And this was published by Skyhorse Publishing. It's a beautiful story about coming of age and finding her place within the wider world, starting with a heritage trip to Israel, to a kibbutz, and continuing on from there. I know that I'm not the only one to have said that it's great to have something else to think about during this nail biter of an election. Well, The Same River Twice has received some great reviews in Library Journal, Booklist, and Publisher Weekly. And I'm pretty sure that it's also bound for our bestsellers wall, and that's thanks to you. So thank you to each and every one of you who ordered the book from us. It means a lot. And Pam has signed all of your books and then some in case you'd still like to order from us. And they're on their way to you. And so if you don't have your book yet, it's going to be there soon. Elliott Bay Book Company is now open for in-store browsing, both drop-in and by appointment, as well as for curbside pickup and mail order. Masks and limits on numbers of people in the store, of course, it goes without saying, but we're glad to be back and inviting people in the store. So Pam is appearing in conversation with freelance writer, writing coach, podcaster, and blogger Paulette Perhach. She is the creator of the Writer's Welcome Kit, which is an online course for writers that Hugo House licenses. Her book, inspired by the course Welcome to the Writer's Life, was published by Sasquatch Books, and we celebrated with her with that book when it came out. And that book was also selected as one of Poets and Writers' best books for writers. She blogs about writer's craft, business, personal finance, joy, and most recently, the pandemic, at welcometotherwriterslife.com. And she also has a podcast, and Pam's was on that podcast recently called Let's Talk About Money. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that as well. So thank you all for joining us. And so now I'd like to welcome Pam Mandel and Paulette Perhach to the Elliott Bay virtual stage.
Thanks for having us, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yes, the smattering of applause.
Wave our hands around, right? So I had really wanted to do this in person because, again, I'm a Seattle writer and Elliott Bay is sort of our cornerstone bookstore. There's a lot of wonderful independent bookstores in Seattle, but Elliott Bay is the one that I know the best. And I used to have an artist studio in Pioneer Square, and I spent a lot of time in the old basement of the former Elliott Bay, going for lunch, eating soup and bread and drinking coffee and talking nonsense with my friends. And the new space is beautiful. It's fantastic. And I was up there the other day, and I have to say, I was really feeling kind of sad to see a bookstore that was not bursting with people. So I just wanted to, before we dive into all of this stuff, if you have an Amazon order, I want you to cancel it and call either your local independent bookstore or call Elliott Bay and ask them to send you a copy, because Amazon will be fine when all this is over. We're getting all of our other stuff from them anyway. So if you can, please support your independent bookstores. Cheers.
Cheers.
So
Very much so. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk tonight. Super excited.
I'm just going to read a really short chapter from the middle of the book. And then we're going to do, Paulette has a bunch of questions, and then hopefully we are going to take questions from you all. And again, I'm delighted that you're here. It's so nice. And it breaks my heart a little bit that I can't see your faces, but seeing you all say hi in the chat is really nice. So thank you for that. All right. This really is right from the middle of the book. Just for context, I had been hitchhiking across Europe with my very bad boyfriend, and we ran out of money and we got stuck on Corfu. And my very bad boyfriend called his dad and asked him to send money so we could get unstuck. I don't know what Alistair told his father we were going to do with the money. I imagine they argued. I could picture his father telling him to come home. You're not getting any younger, son. I'm not going to make this offer forever. Alistair saying it wasn't going to happen. Maybe Alistair lied, telling his father what he wanted to hear. Alistair was mean and a petty thief. He could have been a liar too. His father wired a few £100, enough to give us time to decide what to do next, enough to get us both back to England if we went on the cheap like we'd gone on the way down. We headed in the exact opposite direction, southeast towards Athens. I was as excited about Athens as I'd been about Paris. In school, I'd learned about Greece as the birthplace of Western democracy. I knew the names of the Greek philosophers, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. I imagined the Forum as a crowded plaza where you could get coffee and discuss the meaning of existence with strangers. I wanted to see the columns of the Acropolis against the Greek sky, to see where the marbles I'd seen in the British Museum had come from. I was eager to visit another great European city, one important in art and history, a city people would look at you with interest when you said you'd been there. It mattered to me what people would think when I said I'd been to Athens. More specifically, what they'd say when I told them I'd hitchhiked to Athens. I wanted people to feel impressed with my travels. The truth was not so impressive. I had been a tourist of the worst kind, taking advantage of the people of Corfu while remaining completely ignorant of the culture of the place. We were camping illegally. My boyfriend was shoplifting and working without a permit. I let the island's poorest residents feed me. It didn't occur to me I was taking things away from them too. It's not like we got out of it ourselves. Alistair's father freed us from our open air dead end. I didn't think about any of this. I just wanted to feel tough, worldly, like I could manage on my own anywhere. But I was just another cheap backpacker, barely contributing to the local economy. The tourists Alistair liked to make fun of were better guests than we were. When the wire transfer from Alistair's father came through, we took the ferry back to the mainland. I wrote Athena on a piece of scrap cardboard in big block letters. We walked to the highway. We'd sit on our packs on the shoulder of the motorway when the traffic was in a lull, jumping up when a car or truck appeared on the horizon. Getting rides was easy. The truck drivers always stopped. It was always middle-aged men, and they were always unfailingly kind. Even when I hitchhiked alone up and down the island looking for work and back in Israel, it was always middle-aged men, sometimes Arab farmers, and they were always kind. I learned this from hitchhiking with Eli. If you acted like strangers weren't dangerous, like they were friends offering help, they mostly responded in kind. I remembered Eli every time I stood on the asphalt shoulder, watching the truck slow down and then stop. He always greeted the drivers with surprise and graciousness, like they'd given him a gift. I tried to do the same. I'd been hitchhiking for months, sometimes alone, and the only trouble I'd had was during my trip with Ronnie to Sinai when that soldier grabbed me. Just a little bit of context. This, of course, is a callback to earlier in the book, and I'm talking about a guy that I hitchhiked all over Israel with and a girlfriend that I also did some travel with. Alistair and I were covering good distance on our way south until late afternoon when our ride dropped us at a walled village along the highway. We stayed on the shoulder for what felt like hours. A car would blow by every 15 or 20 minutes. Then they got further apart until traffic stopped altogether. The town, the fields surrounding it, the highway, everything was silent. Even the birds had taken the afternoon off. The day was fading. There's no hitchhiking after dark. People who can't see you will not pick you up. We walked around looking for a restaurant, a guest house, anything open, any place to ask about camping for the night or to buy food. But everything was shuttered tight. Was it a holiday? Was it a Sunday? It could have been. We never knew what time it was, much less what day. I sat on the sidewalk with the packs. Alistair circled the town, and then we switched places and I did the same. The houses were hidden behind high stucco walls. The only sound came from the wind in the cornfields surrounding the village. The rows were tight against each other, the stalks strong like young trees, muddy dirt in what little space there was between them. We could not camp in the fields, and it was cornfields as far as we could see. With each passing hour, it looked more like we would pass the night on the sidewalk, waiting for dawn and the day's next possibility of rides. The heat and silence grew heavy. We'd gone silence too. Words were not going to get us off the sidewalk. An hour went by, two, the shadows got longer. A man appeared and beckoned for us to follow him. He was thin, with dark hair, overdressed for the heat in long pants and a dark long-sleeved shirt. He opened a gate in the wall and led us across a back courtyard. He showed us to a neat little room with a big lumpy bed and calendar pages taped to the wall. After showing us the bedroom, he led us under the back stairs of the main house to a little bathroom, the toilet flushed by filling a bucket and pouring the water into the bowl. We tried to give him some money, but he pulled his hands back, shook his head. No. He disappeared and came back a few minutes later with a picnic in a paper bag, hard-boiled eggs, bread, strong cheese, oranges. We tried again to give him some money, and again he refused. He put his hands together in a prayer sign and said something we could not understand and was gone. I felt like I had dreamed him. It wasn't obvious where he'd come from, and when he left out the gate of the courtyard, it wasn't clear where he was going. Early the next morning, we closed the gate behind us to walk the short distance back to the highway, and in no time, we were climbing into the cab of a semi-truck. I'm going to leave it there.
Love that scene. That was one of my favorites. I love those moments in travel where you're like, are we going to our deaths or are we going to like something we'll never forget, you know? And to travel is to kind of throw yourself out there in a way. And, you know, I had sensed about you from knowing you that you were just my kind of woman. And this book confirmed why, and everything that you'd been through and everything that you overcame and, you know, experienced and opened yourself up to. I just loved that. So, you know, why did you feel like this story had to get out there, that after 40 years, you were like, this story needs to be told? As, you know, as much time has passed, it's still, you know, it's still in there and wants to come out.
Oh boy. You know, so I've told this story a few times. I'm going to tell it again. My friend Alex started this magazine called Fields and Stations, and it is a beautiful magazine. And when he launched this publication, he contacted me and asked me to write a memoir piece for the back of the book. And I had been suffering from a really severe depression, like medical depression, diagnosed like bad in the hole depression. And I said, Alex, I'm not myself and I can't write and I'm not going to do this for you right now. And I love that you asked me, but I have nothing for you. I can't do this right now. And he said, okay, I'm really sorry you're having a hard time. And just so you know, I'm going to ask you again. So Alex asked me 3 times, maybe 4. And the last time that he asked me, he said to me, do I remember that you told me once that you had been in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is this place at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, before it went back to Egypt while it was still Israel? Do I remember that you were there right during the transition? And I said, yes, I was. And he said, can you write about that for me? And I said, no, I cannot because of reasons. And he said, okay, but I really want you to think about this. And I was like, yeah, Alex, I mean, you need to stop asking me this. It's not going to happen. And thank you. And I just don't remember that much about it. So we were done talking and I put the phone down and I went and I turned on my computer and I wrote 1,600 words and I sent them to Alex. And he was like, what happened? And I said, well, you asked the right question, I guess. And then like everything, just like, it was like this, the tap was turned, the floodgates were open and it all just came behind it. And I was like, oh, wait. And I remembered all of it. I just remembered all of it. Now, the other thing that happened about the same time was a friend of mine gave me, her name's Jess Lowry, and she has this course called Rewrite Your Life. And she gave me access to it. And so I took her writing class because I was trying to make myself just do things, right? Like I wasn't writing, nothing was happening. And I did all these exercises. And as through the course of these exercises, I sort of tapped into this vein. It was the same vein that Alex sort of opened at the same time, that was like, oh, you're really supposed to be writing some kind of YA sort of thing. And I was like, that's ridiculous. That's not what I'm supposed to do at all. But again, like they both sort of came together, because while this is not a traditional, it's not YA fiction, my character, who is me, is very much a young adult at this very specific age, 17, 18, 19 through most of the book. And it absolutely fits that genre, right? And so these two things kind of converged, and then I couldn't stop.
Mm-hmm. Love that. That's incredible. So tell us about the scope of this trip, because that's what's so incredible. And it is, it's kind of like these adventure years, because you do come back for a little while, but what is the scope in time and locations of the entire trip?
Right. So it starts when I'm 16, because I was a foreign exchange student in Sweden, but that's really just a bookmark. It's a reference. So that's my first real international travel. And then the rest of the book takes place, I go from the US to Israel. Let me think. I should have drawn a map. I have to piece this thing together. From the US to Israel, where I spend a great deal of time doing crazy things. I go back to the US for a while, and then I go to London, and then I travel across land. So we hitchhike across Europe, which is where that scene is from this hitchhiking across Europe. Mm-hmm. We run out of money in Corfu. We go back to Israel, and then we go Egypt, Pakistan, India, before I go back to the US. So the furthest place I get is up in the Himalayas in India. So it's half the planet, maybe 2/3, from suburban California to the Himalayas. And most of it is in the early 80s.
And is there, and that's what's interesting about it, is that it's a different kind of travel where, I remember in 2017, I was traveling South America and I couldn't Google anything, but I could call. So I would get in a bad situation, call my sister and be like, I need you to look up buses from Buenos Aires right now. And I never called her calm. I was always just freaking out, but it was so funny because I had some capabilities, but not others. And you had no smartphone, no internet. So what were some things that happened on this trip that could not have happened, if you had a smartphone, good and bad? What was the difference there?
Wow. This whole business of getting washed up with no place to stay is, of course, something that could, that just wouldn't happen, right? You'd book an Airbnb, right? You'd book a hostel, you'd do something. You wouldn't end up with nowhere, right? You would have a map. You would be like, I can't stop hitching here. This is bad. You would have a sense of your destination, but also I was truly uninformed about so many of the places that I had gone. Because I just didn't have access to information about it, right? Everything was so shoestring and accidental. Most of this adventure was sort of accidental that I wasn't really prepared for it. And now I'm like, what are you, insane? What? That's no way to travel, right? And I don't know that I could even have got that far and stayed that uninformed now. It feels like it would be impossible to maintain that kind of naivete even, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was reading when Jason Wilson, the series editor of Best American Travel, described your book as a love letter to a certain kind of beautiful aimlessness. And I loved that. And I feel like we're kind of in this time now where it's a rush to fill that, the race to nowhere, get in the right kindergarten so that, you can get in the right, all these steps. And what effect did that have on you to have this time of kind of beautiful aimlessness where you're we're here, we're now, we're hanging out on this beach? How did that affect your worldview?
So I am an acute observer of things, And I suspect that some of it goes back to that, right? When you can't go anywhere and all you can do is sit, and you can't disappear into your phone. All you can do is look at what's around you, right? That's it. Like you can sort of collect your thoughts, write them in your journal, and observe where you are. And that's such a good question. I like that so much. And so I think that probably fed into why I am that sort of acute observer, because I was forced to do that, right? Like I didn't have a choice, right? You can't sit on the side of a road waiting for a ride and not be present where you are. There's nowhere to go, right? You don't have your phone to disappear into. Maybe I'd have a book with me, maybe I didn't. It sort of depended on where we were. Sometimes I would read, but like there's only so much of that you can do when you're sort of hitchhiking or something. You need to be present, right? And so that ability to be present and like look at the world around you is probably where some of that comes from. Yeah.
I love that. Is there anything that you do now where you say, oh, this reminds me of my adventure years?
There are small things that will sort of make things spark. But travel's really different now, right? It's really different now. Although there is a thing that I do now that I have this attitude about traveling where once I get to the airport, right? Like there's this sense of that all the things that are going to happen are outside of your control, right? Sometimes, and when I step out of a car at the airport, somebody's driving out of the airport, I've taken an Uber or a Lyft, or I've taken the bus or whatever. I get to the curb at the airport. I'm like, everything that happens from this point forward until maybe I am in a hotel room or something at my destination is totally up for grabs, right? Like I'm not flying the plane. I don't control the weather. Don't get to decide who I'm sitting next to. Like none of those things. It's all up for grabs. And that is very much like that. And that feels like the only place actually when I travel now where I can really feel that way, because often, I'm traveling with an agenda or a destination, or I have something I'm supposed to be doing. That being able to travel that kind of, you can still get this kind of vibe from a road trip. Like, and I still love to go on big road trips that are really unstructured. I knocked around the Mississippi Delta for 10 days a couple of years ago, and it really felt that kind of thing, because I didn't have an agenda, and I would stop and I would be like, I guess I'm going to lunch there. And then things would happen. I would have conversations. They would be sort of very unexpected and not the kind of thing that would happen at home. And I would just be like, this is out of my control, so there's still you can still have that kind of serendipitous interaction, but you have to make space for it, right? You can't be scheduled to the eyeballs to get for that stuff to happen.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what about, traveling with no money? I had a time where I had to do a couch surfing in Colombia, and I got locked in an apartment with an old lady and a chicken with my friend Tessa, and she could not understand our Spanish and we could not understand her. And we had to just sit there and wait for someone to let us out. And I was like, this would not have happened if we had money for a hotel, but we were like trying to stretch, our time as much as possible.
Right.
How did that affect you? I think that there's something to be said for not, for the creativity that brings. Like, what were some of the benefits of having to do it on such a shoestring?
I wouldn't intentionally, I don't think anybody should intentionally travel with so little cash, right? Like it's foolish, and also it can be exploitive, right? So there's that aspect of it where if you have that little, what are you doing? Right? There's I don't know why you're out there when you have alternatives. And I realize this is coming from a place of tremendous privilege for me to say this, but most of the people who are doing that kind of travel have options, even if they don't believe they have options, right? This story, we call home, Alistair calls his dad and he sends us the money to bail us out, right? There we have options. Being that kind of cheap can be really harmful, I think, in all kinds of ways. But that said, again, I don't hitchhike anymore, and I kind of miss that. Hitchhiking is great. And I pick up hitchhikers sometimes. Like when I'm in Hawaii, I pick up hitchhikers all the time. I love picking up hitchhikers, right? Because I remember what that's like. And so it gives you these opportunities to meet people that you wouldn't otherwise encounter. And so when you're, right, having money, you're going to take the bus, you're going to take the train, you're going to fly, you're going to do these other things, right? You're maybe not necessarily going to choose hitchhiking as your first thing, but I really like that, right? Like and again, it was very rare that I experienced any kind of danger. People were not really genuinely interested in, like, they just want to talk.
Someone posted in the comments, all caps, stranger danger, LOL, which is
not a real thing, Vaughn. Stranger danger is not a real thing. It's fake. Stranger danger is just to make us feel afraid of people.
There's a lot in your trip that you've said like makes you cringe a little bit. What is something that you're like, that you will always kind of have and be like, you know what, I did that and I'm really proud of myself, and that was a formative thing for me to know that I did that, and no one can take that away from me?
There's part of the trip where I am traveling in India by myself. And I don't really know where I'm going, and I'm supposed to get back to this place where I'm going to go reconnect. We make this arrangement to meet again at another part of the trek. So more context, we're going to go on this trek, and I get a cold. I get a bad cold. So we were going to go across this mountains pass, and I'm sick. And so I was like, I can't do it. I'm not going to slog through 6 feet of snow. I'm not going to go up in the mountains with this cold. I'm going to go back to town, which was, I don't know, 2-3 days bus trip away, or, like a by jump, like if I did some overnights. Maybe it was only 2 nights. Anyway. But I had to, the first thing I had to do was walk back out of the mountains, which I did on my own. And I remember meeting these Australian girls who were doing a similar trip. And I was just walking by myself out of this forest, and they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, what do you mean? What am I doing? They're like, going back to town. And they were like, you are alone. Aren't you afraid? And I was like, of you? Like, you're who's here with me, right? So that was really, like, I think about that sometimes too. And it didn't even occur to me to be afraid. And I love thinking about that too, right? I went to town. I stayed in this beautiful mountain inn for a couple of days and got over my cold. And then I took a bus back to the city and, went back to the place where I was supposed to meet my boyfriend. And it was such a, in retrospect, when I think about it in retrospect, I think about how competent I was, right? Like, wow, you totally managed that. Like, that's crazy. Like, India is a very far away, different place. And I was 18, 19, knocking around there by myself alone, and I was like, I'm just going to go do this thing. Like, it didn't even occur to me that I could not do it. So amazing. That level of
how do you think?
I was going to say that level of naive confidence is, pretty exciting.
Yeah. How do you think you'd be different if you had never gone on this big adventure?
Oh my God. In 100,000 ways. We would not be having this conversation, for starters, right? I got the fever so much about seeing the world. What's the opposite of xenophobia, right? Like, I have that, right? Like, I have this great love for faraway places and the people that populate them. I don't default to fear in the face of strangers. There's a million ways I'd be different if I hadn't done this, right? Like, if I had just stayed home, I just can't even imagine. And I mean, when you get to the sort of end of my book, I sort of tie it all up with this idea. I don't feel like this is a spoiler, but like, that stuff makes us who we are, right? Like, I wouldn't be who I am today if it was not for this informative adventure,
Absolutely. Yeah. Formative is such a good word for it.
Yeah.
Of course, there were some kind of especially gender related issues that you come up against. And, you and I had talked about your sense of self. And, I think your sense of maybe womanhood is what we can talk about first, where you see so many different ways of being a woman revealed in different cultures. How did you come to see being a woman in the world, and how did that change your view from thereafter?
Right. So it really depends on where you are, of course. Like geography plays a huge role in this. I think increasingly less so, but not enough less so in the world at large. And I'm thinking maybe the US is one of those places where it's not enough less so. I have a lot of opinions about that. Burn down the patriarchy already. It is late. But I remember in Egypt and Pakistan, the way women lived at the time, they were very, very separate from men, right? And they dressed differently and they behaved differently, and they could not be out in public by themselves. It was just not a thing that happened. So, I sort of became aware of the fact that I was behaving in these ways that were not acceptable in these parts of the world. It's funny though, when I think about it in retrospect, and I don't really say much about it in the book, but I think as I'm thinking about it right now, I think about how, I spent all that time in Israel, and women and men both serve in the military, and they are both trained in combat. And when you take a bus in Israel, you are just as likely to sit next to a beautiful young woman with perfect ringlets and an AK-47 as you are to sit next to a totally hot dude in perfect ringlets and an AK-47, right? And so in that culture, women do all the things in that society. And there's, depending on where you sit in that society, because there's these very conservative Hasidic Jewish populations where women are relegated to these specific roles, but there's also this other side of it where they're like on the front, literally on the front lines. And so, again, sort of the geography as to where you are really determines how women are perceived in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. And did that change how you perceived yourself? Like, how do you, I'm so interested in how we humans were this tiny little point of consciousness, and all we can see is so much, and what we can see around us totally affects what we think is true, what we think of ourselves. And especially over time, if you do an extended trip, I've found that I can really be surprised at how much it shifts my view. And then when I shift my geography, I'm like, oh, wait, what? No, wait, that's not true at all. Like, what have I been doing? So like for you, was there any kind of change in how you saw yourself as a woman or your own womanhood, or did it make you feel stronger?
I was so young that I'm not sure I even had that kind of specifically gendered identity. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that. I also had a very specific. I was carrying around a very specific role idea about this. I grew up on sort of 70s first wave feminism, right? Which seems super dated right now. Did I mention it's late and we should be burning it all down? I think I might have mentioned that. That's what I was fed, right? Which meant that women were capable of doing things, and they maybe should have jobs, and they maybe should have educations, but how they acted on those things might still be up for grabs. And you could get those things and then go back and have this very traditional heteronormative lifestyle regardless, like, except you were educated, or except you'd had a job for a while, or except you had a part-time job, right? So I didn't feel like it was very complete. So gosh, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that.
Yeah, it's okay. And I feel like throughout the book, there's kind of this concept of alarm bells that should have been going off, and the people who should have been being like, hey, I'm going to ring this alarm bell right now because what I'm hearing is not okay, and that not happening for you.
Right.
How did this change your view of taking care of yourself and grow you as a person,
Right.
looking back on it and realizing like you should have been taken care of a little bit better?
I'm stupid independent, like to a fault. And you've read the book. That is why, right? There's this Geraldine Derudia wrote this blurb on the back of the book, and I'm just going to read it, not because it's not just to feed my vanity, but because it directly speaks to this point. If you were skeptical of fairy tales as a kid, the moral of this gritty story will resonate, that sometimes the only person coming to save you is yourself. You know, that is who I am now, right? Like I am insanely independent, and it's not necessarily the best thing. And, you know, sort of going back to, you know, I told you that my friend Alex asked me to write that story, and I was like, no, I'm depressed. When I finally, like it took me a long time to get help for that. Because, you know, asking for help is a hard thing to do, right? And then when people who should be giving you help when you need it, they should be stepping in when you never see that, you're like, well, nobody's going to help me, so I'm just going to deal, right? So it's not a great, it's not necessarily a great quality. It means I'm hyper competent. You know, I've been self-employed for almost 20 years now. I'm hyper competent at like getting shit done, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm fed well.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about your career actually, because it reminded me, you know, when you went back in the book to California and you're in the mall and it's just like, oh, but you were just on the beach in Israel having this like amazing thing. And it reminded me, I mean, when I came back from Peace Corps, I was so broke that I had to get a temp job immediately. 2 days after I'm back from Peace Corps, I'm in a cubicle the size of a phone booth.
Right.
Just crying and like inputting data and just like, no.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, and that made me a freelance writer as well. Oh, Peace Corps. Cause it's like, once you've seen yourself in the wild and you've experienced the wild, to me, there was no going back.
Right.
And so how did, like, was there no other way that like, they're like, no way, like how did that lead into you becoming a freelancer and needing that freedom?
You know, it's that what you're saying makes sense to me. I don't know that I would say it was that directed. Like I kept trying to get a job and then I kept quitting because I couldn't reconcile the 2-week vacation thing, right? I was like, nah, that's crazy. Like 2 weeks vacation is not enough for a living, breathing human. I need to go do things. And so it was a huge limitation. And freelancing makes it possible for you to be your own boss and to make that stuff happen for yourself. If you're your own boss, you get to set your schedule, right? And I have busy times when I'm working all the time and I wish I could take a month off, but I'm like, you know what, you're going to get that later. So calm down. But when you're a full-time employee in a very traditional workplace, like you're just like, maybe you're getting another week every year. Maybe you're getting another 2 days every year. Maybe you're getting like, it was never going to be enough for me. It was never going to be enough for me. That like I was going to be like, I need 6 weeks, I need 8. You know, and the last time I had a full-time job, which was early in the 90s, my negotiations stalled for a really long time because I was like, this vacation package is ridiculous. Like, I don't care that I'm new. I can't, no. This is not 2 weeks. No, absolutely not. Like, and I ended up negotiating for leave of absence as part of my contract. And actually, even then, I only ended up being employed for 9 months. So if I just.
All right, that's what I thought. Yep. Like, no, can't do it.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, we'll go ahead and take some questions from the audience. We have one. You guys will see something that says Q&A at the bottom, or you can just put it in the chat. I have both open. I do see one in the Q&A that says, from Rich, how did your travels abroad make you feel about the US? Envious, defensive, other? I found myself somewhat more patriotic during my years in Israel, although patriotic is in quotes.
Right. That's, hi, Rich. Thank you. Yeah. So when I first started traveling, for the time period that this book takes place, I didn't really know a lot about what it meant to be an American, period. Right. Like I didn't understand the context of that. And again, like I'm 17, 18, 19. I'm just out of high school and all I've got is a crappy public school history education. And it's not until later that I acquire some sense of identity as an American. I became acutely aware of what I think of as American possibilities right? Like, I think some places are really, like in Britain, if you don't figure out what you want to do by the time you're 14 or something, you're hosed. You're just screwed. And that seems too young for that. And so I liked that as Americans, we seem to have more possibilities for reinvention. So I appreciated that about the nature of being American, but I also became, super critical of global American policy because I saw the impact.
Mm-hmm. Sarah wrote, I know that you have reevaluated both some of your travel experiences and relationships in hindsight. Was it the writing process that forced that, or just growing up along the way?
Yeah. Writing this book was like cleaning out the attic. I'd been carrying around a lot of stuff up in the attic for a long time. And so I think probably a lot of it was reevaluated as the process of writing the book over the last 2.5 years. I'm looking at your question still, Sarah. Yeah, I think like writing the book, it was a lot of work, right? And I mean like a lot of work up in here, not necessarily just at the keyboard, not just the typing and crying, but the process of thinking about what these things mean, right? And yeah, and my travel experience is definitely like I've done a lot of, like, I didn't stop traveling when this book ends. Like I've been a traveler since I was 16, and I'm still very much a traveler. And definitely growing up has caused me to reevaluate some of the way I traveled, some of those experiences. And I'm like, that's messed up. Don't do that, in a way that I wouldn't have been when I was much, much younger.
Mm-hmm. Great. Andrew asked, how would you compare your Jewish identity in Southern California versus your Jewish identity after living in Israel?
My Jewish identity when I lived in Southern California was just like I was just a Jewish kid in a Jewish family, and it didn't really play a very big role in things for me. I didn't live in a Jewish community. I don't think that I knew that there was a Jewish community outside of this occasional like Hebrew school kind of interactions I had. It wasn't a big part of my life at all. And then after, I think living in Israel just made me aware of the fact that a Jewish community was a thing and existed. And I don't think I even knew that before. I don't think I had access to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Dorothy is here with the AP English question. Everything we do is motivated by deep needs. What do you think is the core need or needs you are trying to meet in traveling? Freedom? Any others?
You should read the book. You should read the book. I know you will read the book, Dorothy. So, I really needed an education. And I think that my traveling definitely provided that in a very unconventional way. And I got a more conventional education later. I should have been in college. And I say that with like, I really mean that. I should have been in college. I should not have been doing this. But this trip fed my deep curiosity to know about the world. And after you read the book, you'll understand why I'm sort of being edgy about the question or twitchy about it. Because there's so many other things going on, and it's easy to think also that I was looking for a place to be home. But I didn't find that until many, many, many years later. And I might actually say that the first time as an adult on my own that I felt at home was when I moved to Seattle, shortly before I turned 30. So it took me a very long time to find a place that felt like home. But probably that played part of it, that I was looking for a place to be home. And oddly, I was just going further and further and further away from places that could serve that role through the course of this trip, instead of going back to where those things were actually available to me.
It's almost like if home feels alienating, then I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Where? where I should feel that way. It's like too painful to feel that way in your own home. Like if I'm going to feel like a stranger somewhere, I might as well feel like a stranger somewhere where I am a stranger.
Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah. Yeah.
So many feelings. Okay. I'll keep those to myself. I'm going to go off to type and cry myself. So Vaughn asked, after a lifetime of global travel, what is or are your favorite locales or least favorite, and the proverbial why?
So I used to try not to say that I didn't like anywhere, that everywhere had something redeeming. And then I went to Missouri and I had to change that. Sorry, Missouri. So I think Missouri is my least favorite place that I've ever been. And probably because oh man, it was just, it's the worst in America. I'm sorry.
What about your favorite places?
I just found it so painful. And you know, there's my favorite is typically wherever I'm gonna go next, or where I just got back from, or like there's, again, you know, I used to be like there were no bad places before I went to Missouri. You know, I went to Mississippi. I had the most amazing time. I went with my friend Andy Murdoch to Elko, Nevada, which is nowhere. We had an incredible time. So it's sort of, most places have something amazing to find. You know, in Elko, we had in this extremely charmless restaurant, we had the most amazing Palestinian meal. It was really spectacular, really, really good food. Like there, if you look, you can find something good almost anywhere, except for maybe Missouri. Sorry.
All right. Kevin asked, I've always found your writing to be deeply insightful, but this is another level. It's raw. Do you feel exposed or glad you got through it? I, for one, am really moved to learn this part of your history.
I feel terribly exposed, actually, and nervous, and it was hard. And I have intermittent anxiety attacks about how people are going to react to the book, specifically my family members. So, but also, you know, imagine carrying this around for so long and not putting it down. And so that part is awesome, to be like, this is outside of me now. Like, I don't have to think about it anymore. I can use all this space in my cleaned out attic for other things. I have bigger things to think about now than this thing that is 40 years old. And it's big and it's heavy, and I've been dragging around with me for a long time, and it's time to like throw it out in the world and let it live on its own.
Love that. Yeah. Winfield asked, where would you like to go? Where would you next like to explore, both location and experientially?
So, you know, I've been working on this project called The Statesider, which is basically about travel in the US, American travel and culture. And as much as I did not enjoy Missouri, although Springfield is a nice town and I had a really good burger there. Also, there's a place there where they make this thing that's like a pie milkshake, where like it's a milkshake, ice cream, milk, but they put pie in with it. I mean, come on. So, right. I want that right now. I'm really interested in the US right now. Of all places, like if I had all the money and time in the world to do something, I would go knock around the US. There are places in the US where I've never been to Oklahoma. You know, I've never been to Nebraska. I would like to see the sandhill cranes. I've never been to the Gulf Coast. The United States is diverse and interesting and fascinating, and we have a really deep history, and we've done a really bad job of teaching ourselves about it. And I feel like it's really it's the responsible thing for us to do, to understand our own country. And I haven't done that to the degree that I would like to.
Well, I grew up on the Gulf Coast, so that's my home air. So I can give you recommendations for sure.
Right.
On Facebook, Douglas asked, it's been a long journey going from writing the manuscript to pitching it to publishers, which I totally commend you. And I loved how open you were about that process on Twitter. And then when it sold, like I was like in on the win. I was like, yes, we did it.
Thank you.
We did it. Like I was there with you, and I loved that you did that.
Thank you for cheering me on the whole way too. It was really helpful.
Because it's, and I think that's like kind of side note, but like how I really define community and how do I know I'm in a community. And it's like when I started really feeling genuinely happy for the people around me and feeling like we were all in this together, I was like, oh, this is what it is. Right. And that was like awesome. So Douglas asked, I'm wondering, what has Pam learned about herself in the process?
I wasn't sure that I had I didn't know that I could do this actually. My friend Andrew, who's here, was like, you're fine. You're going to get it done. Don't worry about it. And I was like, I've had a lot of doubt. And it is amazing to me that this exists, right? Like when I went to Elliott Bay to go sign and they had this pile of books and I was like, oh my God, they live in the world. I made a thing. And I didn't necessarily believe that it would get picked up by a traditional market. I thought I would have to do it on my own. I didn't think it was commercially viable. And remember, I had been rejected 75 times. That was a lot of rejection. And I didn't know, I probably should have, because I wrote a whole book about being tenacious. I probably should have known that I had the tenacity to do it, but I'm not sure that I believed it when I started it. Like I just was kind of on autopilot writing this thing because it felt like a thing that I had to do. And then when it was done, I was like, that doesn't suck. I should probably try to sell it. And like, I was I had terrible imposter syndrome the whole time, right? Like I was like, oh, I'm a fraud. The book's no good. Nobody's going to want it. All the typical writer garbage. And so I guess I was surprised that I had the endurance to work on a project that was this big for so long.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pete asked, what advice would you tell your pre-crazy trip self in advance of the trip? Go or don't go? And if go, what would you tell her in advance?
Of course I would go, break up with that guy. That's bullshit. You deserve better. So absolutely that. And then in advance, I would be like, read a book. God damn it. Read a book. Guidebooks existed. They were not super prevalent for some of the places that I was in. I traveled with Lonely Planet's very first commercially produced India guide, but it existed. And going to a place where you know nothing about the culture is a total idiot move. Don't do that. Learn something, right? Like you're gonna have to cover your head because that's what people do there. You're a woman traveling and in the Arab world, you need to cover your head. Like, read a book. Oh my God.
Don't make the person in the lobby of the hotel have to stop you on the way
out. Right. Don't be that traveler, right? Like, learn your basic things. It's not just please and thank you. It's like, what are the baseline things that make this culture go? What are the baseline expectations for behavior that you should meet? And like, screw your sensitivity about how you should get to be in these places and the way that you get to be in the rest of the world, because you don't make the rules. You don't. Like, and yes, women should get to travel with their heads uncovered, and women in Saudi Arabia should get to, yes, they should get all these things, and they do not have them. And there's no reason to make yourself a target because you're carrying around some chip about that. And to be clear, I was not carrying a chip on my shoulder about it. I just did not know. And that is stupid. Don't do that. Yeah.
What would be your advice to people that age now who maybe want to take a gap year before college or something like that?
This is a really old piece of standard travel advice, but it's a really good one, which is twice the money, half the stuff. Right?
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard, but worth it. Right? Like, you don't need that extra, you don't need that sweater. What you need is another $50, right? That's going to do, $50 is going to do you way better than like that fancy zip fleece. Don't save it. No one cares what you look like.
And then I think my, like the last question I would have is like, what, you know, I was surprised at when I was reading this book, I was like, I don't know how it's going to make me feel to read a travel memoir right now. And I was so happy to feel that it made me feel in love with travel again and going along with the experience and kind of experiencing some of that, that what I get from travel of being like, oh, I didn't know that was there. Or this was like this, you know, some of that awe, some of that wonder of the world that you get to experience. How have you as a traveler been getting through COVID and quarantine and trying to live in that personality type that needs novelty and experience without being able to get that outside of your house?
Badly. I'm getting through it badly. Did I mention there's a chocolate cake in my kitchen and I've been eating it? You know, I really love to get out of the house. Of course I do. I love to travel. I miss being able to go out in the world. I miss all those things, but I actually also am, I'm very comfortable alone in my house as an introverted kind of person. I'm happy by myself. I didn't think I'd spend this much time alone. This was not what I signed up for, certainly, but you know, and so also like, not everybody on here is from Seattle, but I live in West Seattle right now. My neighborhood is basically a functional island. It's so idiotic. So like getting anywhere is a huge hassle. Like going anywhere is a huge hassle. So I'm kind of stuck with things the way they are. And, you know, you asked me about, you know, I was talking earlier about sort of that sense of being when you're waiting for a ride, all you can do is look at where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's what I've been doing. But the other thing is that I've been working on this project. It's called The Same River Twice. And it actually hasn't been out of my hands for that long. So this has been really consuming. So my answer to that question might be different after winter is over. I'm really scared about winter here. You know, the weather's bad, it's cold, it's wet, it sucks. And getting outside is going to be increasingly more of a challenge. I'm worried about that a lot. But this, like, I think it's maybe just 2 months that it's been out of my hands. So it's not even been like the amount of time from when I handed it off to when it went to press was published and on the shelf was not very long. So my reality has been inside this book until very recently. And we're going to find out how I'm doing. Right? Because I've just been in here instead of anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm so excited for the book to be out and I loved it. So I'm going to be
Thank you.
buying it for some Christmas presents.
And winter time, what a great time to curl up with a good book, nice hot toddy or some hot tea or something like this. You've taken us on a wonderful adventure. Thank you so much. Thank you to Paulette, and a big thank you to Pam Mandel, The Same River Twice. We've got lots of copies. This is a book that you're going to want to share with your friends. And, you know, if my granddaughter were just a little bit older, and she will be, this is the book I would like her to read, I think. So, hey, take care. And thank you, everyone who came tonight. We really appreciate it. And
Yeah,
thanks for all of your
much.
support.
Yeah.
So, okay. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Everyone, bye.